Because when what you knew turns into something new, it can turn what you do upside down.
Hey leaders, I hope everybody is having a great week and loving the discussion that we're having about upside down, these ideas that Jesus teaches some things that turn our worlds upside down. So this week we are in week 2 of that, but I wanted to share with you a quick quote that I saw this week from another leader on Facebook, and it says this. He said, with the average kid attending our church half of the year, that's about every other week for most students, middle and high school students will use their smartphone more in 1 week than they will attend our church in 1 year. So what will you communicate with the time you have? See, what he was basically saying is what you say each week matters. Think it through. Have a plan for what you want to communicate at every opportunity we have our students. Because our time is very limited, and every phase has a unique opportunity to share a message. See, God has given us the time that we do have each week, so it's our job to make that time count. See, fun matters, love matters, the truth about God matters, and you, as a small group leader, play a part in connecting teenagers to that message, and we couldn't do what we do without you. So think about the time that we have, and let's make that time count. We do such a great job at this. Just wanted to share that with you as encouragement to think about that week in and week out. But thank you for what you do as always. So like we said, this week we are in week 2 of our series called Upside Down. We've been talking about how Jesus demonstrated a completely different way to lead and love other people. In Jesus' culture, he treated people in a way that was opposite of what anyone expected. It was upside down. Last week we talked about how Jesus served his circle of friends in a way that people had never done before. This week we're going to look at how Jesus talked about his enemies and our enemies. Now, in this day and age, it may be a little more complicated to determine who your enemy is, but if we're honest, we can admit we've got enemies. Who are they? Let's start by asking a couple of questions. Have you ever said, I hate fill in the blank? See, some of you have a pretty strong case for why you would use the word hate when referring to a particular person. Others of us, not so much. You may have reacted a little too intensely or dramatically to a situation or two that wasn't that big of a deal or not worth putting somebody in the hate category. But most of us have people who are in our hate bucket. See, anyone you hate, whether they deserve it or not, is an enemy. Sometimes it's deserved. Sometimes it's an overreaction. But that's an enemy. Second thing is there anyone you have a fake argument with in your head and you try to win that argument? If you've really thought about it, who's the person that wins the award for most lost arguments with you in your mind, in your imagination over the past 6 months? You may or may not think of that person as your enemy. This person might even be a friend or a family member that you love a lot, but they fall into an enemy category for this conversation that happens in your head. Why? Because they most constantly are on the opposite side of you in your mind. Now, the third way we would categorize somebody as an enemy is there someone you'd secretly love to embarrass in front of the whole school or at work or at home? See, that might be a bit extreme, so we'll dial it back a little bit. Is there someone you'd love to see fail or at least be less amazing or less successful than they usually are? Maybe it's someone who embarrassed you in the past, or you've always wanted to change or get a chance at revenge, or they always seem to make you look bad just because they always look so good. We can make enemies out of those people in the blink of an eye. But let me put your mind at ease. This week isn't about them. It's about us. It's about you and me. I think this week can be a game changer for you when it comes to thinking about the people you don't like or who don't like you. The reasons for moving somebody into our enemy category and putting them on our do not like you list are unique and extreme as our personalities can get sometimes. In some cases, the reasons are valid. In some cases, they're a bit of a stretch. In all cases, they feel completely right. See, Jesus modeled an upside-down way of responding to enemies, though, and that's what we're going to look at this week. Jesus went through one of the worst moments in history, and his enemies were real. His friends had left him. Jesus had every right to react and lash out. He wasn't guilty. He didn't do wrong, but he still found himself being hung on the cross next to criminals. See, when I was growing up, I had pictures of Jesus as like an emotionless, a very serious and angelic-like figure. Anytime I learned something about Jesus and the way that he responded to a situation, my thought was always, well, of course that's how Jesus responded. He was perfect. He was without sin. I'm a sinner. People remind me that all the time, and that's true. But I think it's important for you to understand something. Jesus was fully God, but Jesus was also fully human. That means Jesus felt the very same emotions that we feel when it comes to our enemies. Jesus was tempted like we're tempted. Jesus felt the pull towards responding to people the way that you and I do. He wasn't an emotionless robot. He was without sin because he stayed so connected to his Heavenly Father. He always was in tune with how God would have wanted him to react. So when we read about Jesus on the cross, we see how he responded to the people who beat him and eventually killed him. And we need to understand that Jesus had a choice in his response, which makes his response even more powerful. See, Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing," as he's on the cross. Luke's account teaches us about the heart of God, his heart towards humanity. And when humanity was at its worst, Jesus still responded this way. But what should we do with that when it comes to our enemies? Let's go back to what Jesus said for the answer. He said, first of all, "Father, forgive them." The first thing Jesus did was pray for them. But it wasn't a prayer like I often pray over my enemies. I'll say something like, "God, make them realize how big of a jerk they're being." No, Jesus said, "God, will you forgive them through me? Put your forgiveness, God, in my heart towards them." In other words, are you praying for your enemies? Are you asking God to move in your heart so you can see your enemies the way that God sees them? That's the first upside down step that Jesus modeled for our friendships. And the second thing that Jesus said is, "For they do not know what they are doing." Jesus could have said and thought a lot of things about the people who were destroying him, but he chose to see them with compassion. And that's a big difference for us in our friendships as well. Maybe you've heard the phrase before, hurting people hurt people. The truth is your enemies are probably hurting. Their actions and behaviors come from a broken place in their stories and in their hearts. That doesn't excuse the wrong they do. It gives you another lens with which to look at your enemies. When it comes to your enemies and the upside down way of living, Jesus demonstrates this idea of don't focus on revenge and self-protection. Don't repeat the hatred towards them over and over in your mind. And then understand that they, like you, have some gaps in their life that cause them to do hurtful things from time to time. And go upside down with your compassion towards enemies in our lives. Your situation may not be solved by taking an upside down approach to your enemies, but you can trust that God can work in you and through you and around you, despite the way people make you feel. Why? Because God's bigger, and God sees a bigger picture when it comes to our enemies and the way that we respond to and treat them. So that's what we're talking about this week. There should be lots of good discussion about this because I know it's true about me. I know it's true about you. We all have people in our enemy bucket. So how we deal with them and how we do this thing with life and living together with people that we don't always like is a big deal. So that's what we're talking about this Sunday. We'll see you at 4:45 for our small group leader meeting. And also, don't forget, December 3rd, we have our small group leader Christmas party. You won't want to miss it. Last year was a ton of fun, and this year we've got some good stuff planned as well. So we'll see you there. Have a great week, guys. Bye.